The sleeping giant. Humanity. The name alone conjures up a lot of thoughts among the denizens of the galaxy. Humanity, or the Terans as they are commonly known, is the premier trading power of the galaxy. If you need something, anything, the Terans can get it to you. Their enormous X-class super freighters are marvels of engineering, capable of transporting over 1 billion tons of raw materials and luxury goods. With a Teran crew at the helm, you can rest assured that nothing will interfere with your shipment. Located 25,000 light-years from the galactic core, the Teran Federation is strategically isolated from the constant disputes of the galactic conglomerate. But they aren't too far removed. It only takes a Teran month for their ships to reach the heart of the conglomerate. The Terans maintain a policy of strict non-interference in galactic politics, claiming to be pacifists, a claim that was put to the test during the brutal Tidunk War. In that conflict, the Terans traded with both sides, providing essential supplies like food and dihydrogen monoxide, water. They assured the Galactic Council that this was solely to ensure the survival of civilians, but their neutrality raised suspicions. The Council's researchers delved into Teran military history and found something startling: a rich and storied tradition of warfare that abruptly ended a century before first contact. The final conflict, known as the War to End History, had been so devastating that it led to a complete reformation of Teran military doctrine. After that war, the Terans made a solemn vow, a vow that is now enshrined in their government's guiding documents: the protection of civilians above all else. This concept was alien to many in the galaxy, who couldn't comprehend a war where civilians weren't targets. Poisoning the water supply of factory workers to slow down production was standard practice in most galactic conflicts, but the Terans rejected such tactics outright. The galaxy let them be, allowing them to practice their pacifist ideology without interference. But then came the bombing of IMA by the Tit forces. The Terans, horrified by the wanton destruction of civilian life, immediately halted all shipments to Tit territories, even turning around ships that were already in transit. This sudden cessation of trade sent shockwaves through the Tit government, which demanded an explanation. The Terans' response was simple. They could not, in good conscience, continue to aid in the killing of civilians. The Tit were outraged, interpreting the Teran embargo as a declaration of war. Yet the Terans were too distant for the Tit to muster an effective military response. And so, the galaxy watched as the Tit civilization imploded into a brutal civil war, with the Terans seemingly indifferent to the suffering that their actions had caused. But in truth, the Terans were deeply troubled by the unfolding crisis. They attempted to send peace forces to aid the suffering Tit population, only to be met with hostility from both the government and the people. The Terans learned a harsh lesson from this episode. The rest of the galaxy did not think like them. Their ideals, rooted in the sanctity of civilian life, were viewed as strange, perhaps even crazy. Accepting this reality, the Terans withdrew from supplying governments during times of war, focusing instead on their core mission, trade. However, this perceived retreat from galactic affairs led some to see the Terans as weak, ripe for exploitation. The Teran Federation's vast resources and wealth became an alluring target for those within range. Fortunately for the Terans, the journey to their borders was long and arduous, requiring weeks of travel through the vastness of space. Only two empires were in a position to threaten them: the militaristic District Empire and the more aggressive Fava Empire. The districts, though neutral, respected the Terans' history of warfare, believing that one never truly forgets the art of war. The Fava, on the other hand, were more antagonistic. There had been numerous close calls between Teran super freighters and Fava ships, with tensions rising as Fava star systems began to collapse. When a key star in the Fava Empire went supernova, leading to widespread famine, the Fava turned to desperate measures, sponsoring pirate attacks on Teran freighters to steal food and other supplies. Most of these hijackings were non-violent, with the Fava denying any involvement, claiming that the pirates were merely looking out for their starving families. But the Terans were suspicious, and they began to arm their super freighters in response. What began as a defensive measure soon escalated into a proxy war, though only the Terans were aware that they were engaged in such a conflict. Then the Fava made a fatal mistake. They massacred the crew of a Teran freighter. No longer could the Fava hide behind the pretense of piracy. The The Terans, enraged by the senseless slaughter, demanded the immediate surrender of those responsible. The sleeping giant had been awakened. Humanity, known as the Terans to the rest of the galaxy, was once the undisputed master of trade across the stars. Their X-class superfreighters were the envy of every other species, capable of transporting billions of tons of cargo across light years in mere weeks. With a crew of dedicated Terans, these ships were virtually untouchable, delivering goods with precision and reliability. The Terans prided themselves on their neutrality, claiming to be pacifists who would not interfere in the political and military conflicts that constantly roiled the galaxy. But this principle of pacifism was put to the ultimate test when the Fava Empire began sponsoring pirate attacks on Teran freighters. The Fava, reeling from the effects of a supernova that had devastated their breadbasket star systems, were desperate. They needed food, and fast. When their own resources ran dry, they turned to piracy, hijacking Teran freighters and stealing their precious cargo. At first, these hijackings were bloodless, but things escalated quickly. The situation reached a boiling point when a group of Fava pirates, acting under orders from high-ranking Fava commanders, massacred the crew of a Teran freighter. All 578 crew members were killed in cold blood. The Terans, who had tolerated the piracy for the sake of maintaining peace, were outraged. They demanded justice, telling the Fava royalty that if those responsible for the massacre were not handed over, it would mean war. The Fava queen scoffed at the Terans, openly mocking their threat. She knew that the pirates responsible were high-level commanders in her own fleet, commanders who were supposed to take the cargo without bloodshed. But kinship and loyalty ran deep in the Fava culture, and the queen was unwilling to betray her own, even if it meant war. Confident in their recent military successes, the Fava decided to call the Terans bluff. The Fava fleets, still battle-hardened from their previous conflicts, were quick to mobilize. Within 6 months, the first war fleets were launched, taking a longer, more circuitous route to avoid detection by Teran scanners. Their target was the Teran system of Phallus, a system far from the heavily fortified borders of the Teran Federation. The Fava hoped to catch the system off guard, and they succeeded. The attack on Phallus was swift and brutal. With minimal defenses, the system fell easily to the Fava fleet. The Fava commanders saw this as a statement, a declaration to humanity. We can reach you anywhere, and we will defeat you. But instead of cowing the Terans, the attack had the opposite effect. It enraged them. Shortly after the fall of Phallus, a statement by a Teran diplomat was published across the galaxy, echoing words spoken by Teran leadership centuries before. May we hope that the giant of war never awakens. After millennia of chasing us, it has grown tired. May it only grumble and snore in its long sleep. We must strive to keep it within its slumber, for one day it might once again walk this earth to spite us all. The statement confused many in the galaxy. The speech was laced with metaphors, making it difficult to decipher. Some thought it was about a literal giant, while others speculated it referred to the Terans' latent military power. The latter interpretation gained traction as rumors spread of massive fleet movements within Teran space. But these reports were dismissed by most, as the ships in question were merely superfreighters moving vast amounts of steel. Meanwhile, the Fava continued their assaults, meeting increasing resistance with each attack. The growing losses began to wear on the Fava fleet, and their commanders decided it was time to shift strategies. They claimed victory, boasting before the Galactic Council about how easily they had bested the Terans, and how little resistance the Terans had put up. After their boastful speech, all eyes in the Galactic Council turned to the lowly Teran ambassador. She stood with a smirk, and in a calm but firm voice, began to speak. "The giant does not simply wake up and start fighting," she said, referencing the speech from months earlier. "The giant needs to cook breakfast, get dressed, and arm itself. Only then can the giant's fight truly begin. The war is not over until we say it is." The Fava ambassador laughed, dismissing her words as if they were the punchline to a joke. "You Terans must have forgotten how war works," he sneered. "Perhaps we should explain it to you." But the Teran ambassador simply smiled, knowing that the real battle had yet to begin. The Fava ambassador laughed dismissively, but the Teran representative was not amused. She stood up, her bright blue eyes gleaming with a cold, calculated intensity. The room fell silent as she began to speak, her voice steady and laced with a quiet, simmering rage. A forge does not simply ignite to the point where it can melt iron. No, it must be heated gradually, over time, until the metal becomes pliable, ready to be shaped. Sometimes, if the iron is placed in too early, it doesn't melt instantly, but rest assured, Ambassador, you and your race are that iron, and sooner or later, you will start to melt. With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Unbeknownst to the galactic community, massive movements were taking place within Teran space. Factories surrounding great gas giants churned out old designs and new concepts alike, weapons of unprecedented power and fleets that hadn't been seen in generations. Hundreds of millions were recruited. Scientists concocted devastating weapons capable of burning away a planet's atmosphere, and an armada that spanned entire solar systems began to amass at the borders of the Teran Federation, like a dormant beast waiting to be unleashed. All of this was kept secret, hidden from the eyes of the galaxy, until the day came for it to be activated. That day was January 25th, according to the Teran calendar. Sensors across the galactic core detected a massive movement in space, a wave of ships heading directly toward the Fava Empire. Closer sensors reported that the fleet was so large that it seemed to warp space itself, as countless vessels hurtled through the void at faster-than-light speeds, converging on Fava space. Typically, 2 weeks would have been enough time to organize a defense, but for an armada of the Teran's size, there was only one option left for the Fava: pray to their gods for mercy and accept their impending doom. Despite this, the Fava hastily fortified their borders, hoping they could withstand the initial onslaught long enough to gather intelligence on the Teran ships and weapons. But even that hope was dashed. The first defensive outpost lasted a mere 15 galactic standard minutes from the moment of first contact with the Teran fleet before all communications ceased. The last images transmitted to Fava leadership showed an overwhelming mass of gray ships moving closer and closer until the feed abruptly cut off. The next target was the Gauge system. It lasted longer than the outpost, but not by much. The system held out for 37 minutes before all signals were lost, save for a few deeply buried military bunkers that managed to survive for a full galactic standard day. But even these were eventually overrun by Teran forces, who stormed the bunkers and silenced the final communications. In that short span of time, the Teran armada had already decimated 3 other systems, and the Fava leadership was beginning to panic. The Teran battering ram was heading straight for Jura Prime, the heart of the Fava Empire. The losses provided valuable intelligence to the Fava, revealing the Teran's strategy. The main assault was led by a fleet the Fava nicknamed the Planet Killer, a relentless force that obliterated everything in its path, paving the way for the Capture Front, a secondary force that secured the conquered planets and ensured the main fleet remained well supplied. One thing that shocked the Fava was the Teran's use of projectile weapons, massive, high-velocity slugs that could only be countered with thick armor, unlike the more commonly used energy weapons that were blocked by shields. In a panic, the Fava thickened the armor on their warships and redirected every available military asset to the Jura Prime system in a desperate bid to make a final stand. But when the Teran armada finally arrived at Jura Prime, they did something unexpected. Instead of launching a direct assault, they maneuvered around the system, attacking neighboring systems instead. This sent the Fava leadership into a state of true panic. Those in the know realized that the Terans were executing a calculated encirclement of Jura Prime, trapping the Fava leadership within their own territory. As the weeks dragged on, the Terans held their position just outside the Jura Prime system, leaving the Fava leadership to scramble between attempts to flee and digging in for a fight. Then, the Teran ambassador called for an emergency meeting of the Galactic conglomerate. She stood before the assembly with a calm, commanding presence and began to speak. As you all know, the Teran Republic has been at war with the Fava Empire. True to our principles, we offer peace, but only if the Fava Empire surrenders unconditionally to Teran forces. If our terms are not met, we will obliterate the entire Jura system, home to 58 billion Fava, by triggering a supernova in the Jura star. The resulting death toll could exceed 100 billion, plunging what remains of the Fava Empire into chaos. So I ask you, does the Fava ambassador accept this offer of peace? All eyes turned to the seat where the Fava ambassador should have been sitting, but it was empty. Instead, only a young intern remained, visibly shaken. "What happened to your ambassador?" the high speaker of the Galactic conglomerate inquired, his voice tinged with concern. The intern stammered, He shot himself when we received the order for this emergency meeting. He said the Terans had backed us into a corner." The high speaker sighed deeply. "Well, in turn, you are now the acting ambassador for your people. The decision to accept or decline the Terans' peace offer rests with you." The intern, pale and trembling, muttered a weak, "Okay," before collapsing in his seat. Almost immediately, the direct communication line to the Fava leadership began to ring. It was the Fava Queen, calling to formally accept the terms of the Teran offer. And so, the great Teran armada that had encircled Juror Prime slowly began to retreat, returning to human territory. But they left behind a single message, broadcasted across the galaxy. "May we hope that the giant of war never awakens. For we have all now witnessed the might of the giant and the power it wields. May it only grumble and snore in its long sleep, for we must all strive to keep it at rest. Let us learn from our mistakes, so that the giant may never again walk this earth to spite us all."